Cole Arthur Riley, a writer, poet, and creator of the websites Black Liturgies and the Center for Dignity and Inclusion, recently wrote in her 2024 New York Times best-selling book, This Here Flesh, Spirituality, Liberation, and the Stories That Make Us, on the subject of inclusion and belonging. Quote, if you go without belonging for long enough, if you've known the sting of betrayal, you could end up manufacturing an identity from your alienation. To protect yourself from the reminder and risk of exclusion, you begin initiating distance on your own, calling yourself loner or independent. But a life lived with trust only in the self is exhausting. Belonging. It is one of the deepest yearnings of the human heart. From our earliest days, we seek connection, arms to hold us, voices to soothe us, communities to claim us. Yet, how often do we find that the very spaces intended to nurture belonging become sites of exclusion, even unintentionally? And how often do we, in response to wounds of exclusion, retreat into the safety of self-reliance, choosing distance over risk? This paradox of inclusion, how the pursuit of it can sometimes lead to unintended exclusion, is a challenging one. And it is one we must face, not just as individuals, but as a Unitarian Universalist community committed to creating a world where all are welcome. To begin, let us acknowledge that the desire for inclusion is rooted in something sacred. It is an acknowledgement that every human being has inherent worth and dignity, a principle we hold dear in our faith. But let us also admit that inclusion is not easy. It demands effort, humility, and vigilance. It asks us to expand our circles, stretch our imaginations, and sometimes challenge deeply held assumptions. Our commitment to inclusion often leads us to create spaces that are welcoming to specific groups who have historically been marginalized. This is beautiful and necessary work. Whether we're creating a space for LGBTQIA2S+ individuals, people of color, or those living with disabilities, the intentional act of carving out such spaces is a radical affirmation of worth. Yet, in this act of affirmation, we may inadvertently build walls where we intended to open doors. Have you ever seen this happen? Perhaps you've felt it yourself, walking into a space that was explicitly designed to be welcoming, yet realizing that its culture or language subtly communicated, you do not fully belong here. This is not an easy truth to face, but it is an essential one if we are to grow. How do we create spaces that truly welcome without unintentionally excluding others? How do we honor the needs of the many without neglecting the needs of the one? Returning to the wisdom of Cole Arthur Riley, she reminds us of what happens when exclusion becomes a pattern in someone's life. The sting of betrayal, the ache of alienation, these can lead a person to protect themselves by retreating. The label loner or independent becomes a shield, a way of saying, I don't need what I cannot seem to find. But as Riley warns, this self-reliance is exhausting. Humans are not meant to live in isolation. We are wired for connection. And yet, belonging requires vulnerability. It requires us to risk rejection, to risk the pain of being misunderstood. A recent study published in the 2024 edition of the psychology journal Collabro highlights a Michigan State University study that sheds some light on why this risk feels increasingly difficult in today's world. Researchers tracked over 1 million people from 2000 to 2020, examining how much they care about others' opinions, their willingness to break rules, and their readiness to defend their beliefs. They found that people today are less willing to stand out or defend their beliefs and care more about what others think. William Chopik, the leader of the study, notes that this increased conformity may stem from fear of ostracization. It's ironic, isn't it? The very thing we crave, belonging, can lead us to suppress our authentic selves in an effort to blend in. But this suppression comes at a cost. When we hide who we are, we may avoid conflict, but we also avoid connection. True belonging can never be achieved by erasing our uniqueness. Here lies one of the central tensions of inclusion. To create inclusive spaces, we must acknowledge differences. We must name them, honor them, and celebrate them. Yet, in naming differences, we risk emphasizing them to the point where they become divisions. The shadow side of inclusion is the temptation to create us and them categories, even within spaces designed to unite. For example, consider a community that prides itself on being inclusive to a particular identity group. What happens when someone enters that space who doesn't share that identity but is seeking belonging? Do they feel welcome, or do they sense that their presence disrupts the group's cohesion? Our challenge, then, is to embrace inclusion in a way that expands rather than narrows the circle. To borrow a metaphor, inclusion should not feel like a ticketed event where only those with the right credentials gain entry. Instead, it should feel like an ever widening table where there is always room for one more chair. Courage is a vital ingredient in this work. It takes courage to extend welcome to those who may be different from us. It takes courage to remain open to connection even after experiencing the pain of exclusion. And it takes courage to defend the values of inclusion in a world that often rewards conformity. William Chopik's study reminds us that the courage to stand out has diminished in recent years. But it is precisely this courage that inclusion requires. If we are afraid to speak our truths, afraid to be authentic, afraid to stand out, then our communities risk becoming places of shallow belonging rather than deep connection. As Unitarian Universalists, we are called to model a different way. We are called to create spaces where people can bring their whole selves, their joys and struggles, their beliefs and doubts, their sameness and their difference. And we are called to do this not only for the sake of the individuals who join us, but for the health of our community as a whole. A community that welcomes only sameness is not truly alive. It is in the friction of differences that we grow, learn, and deepen our understanding of what it means to be human. So, how do we move toward a deeper, more expansive understanding of belonging? How do we create spaces where everyone can feel included, even those who do not yet understand our vision of inclusion? I believe the answer lies in three things: humility, curiosity, and love. First, we must approach the work of inclusion with humility. We must recognize that we do not have all of the answers, that we are not perfect, and that we will make mistakes. We must be willing to listen, to learn, and to grow. Humility also means recognizing that inclusion is not about us. It is not about patting ourselves on the back for being woke or progressive. It is about creating spaces where everyone can belong, even those who challenge us, even those who make us uncomfortable. Second, we must approach the work of inclusion with curiosity. We must be curious about the experiences of others, about the ways in which they have been excluded, and about the ways in which we might intentionally exclude them. Curiosity also means being open to dialogue, to conversation, to the possibility that we might be wrong. It means asking questions like, how can we make this space more welcoming? Or what might we be missing? Finally, and most importantly, we must approach the work of inclusion with love. Love is the foundation of our faith. It is the force that binds us together, that reminds us of our shared humanity, that calls us to see the divine in one another. Love means seeing the humanity of those who are different from us. It means extending grace to those who do not yet understand our vision of inclusion. It means believing in the possibility of transformation, both for ourselves and for others. The work of inclusion is not easy. It asks much of us, our time, our energy, our humility. But it also offers us something profound, the promise of true belonging. A belonging that is not based on conformity or sameness, but on the recognition that we are all interconnected, that our differences are not threats, but gifts. As we strive to create spaces of radical inclusion, let us remember the wisdom of Cole Arthur Riley. A life lived with trust only in the self is exhausting. Let us have the courage to trust not only in ourselves, but in one another. Let us take the risk of vulnerability, knowing that the reward is a community where all can belong. And let us commit to the sacred work of expanding the circle, of building a table so wide and so welcoming that no one ever has to wonder whether there is a place for them. May we cause it to be so. Blessed be. Amen. Shalom. Assalamu alaikum. Namaste. Thank you all so much.